We are live. Welcome, my kittens, my unicorns, my degenerates. Welcome to another Discourse live stream. And welcome, Prester John, back to the live stream and our regular co host, Lirpa Strike. This is our second time together today because we have been like marathoning. We already spent 2 hours together on a podcast, and now we're going to spend another couple of hours live streaming. So um, let's just get right into it. What are the most recent pieces that the two of you have written, and what were they about?
You want to go first, Lirpa?
Sure.
Okay, first, I have to stop and say that fucking legendary tree behind you, it looks like it looks like the card Fabled Passage from Magic the Gathering, and that makes me very happy. So anyway, sorry, go on.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah, I wrote that piece that I was talking about a little bit ago. The sequel to that Unconditional Love.
Sorry, one
piece.
second. There's feedback. That might be me. Let me get some headphones.
Oh, okay. I was
Okay.
wondering where that was coming from.
Might be. One second. Oh, jeez.
Keep talking, Lirpa.
Oh, okay. So anyway,
Yeah.
oh yeah, so it's just like kind of a funny story about how I ended up almost breaking up this band or contributing to such a thing. Because yeah, well anyway, it's paywalled, but I unpaywalled it just for this conversation since I figured I'd mention it. So you guys should, if you're a free subscriber or not a subscriber and you want to read it, you should go do that right now.
I saw that you unpaywalled it, and I meant to read it, and then I was horribly negligent and failed to.
Oh, I think I comped you anyway, so you.
Yes, okay.
Yep. So you'll be able to read it. But yeah.
Awesome.
So anyway, yeah, I ended up just being a total groupie about this band, and they got mad about it. And
how did they get mad about it?
Yeah, isn't that what bands want?
What was that?
So isn't that what bands want? To have a group of?
There's an echo. Did you say, what about a swamp?
I said, isn't that what bands want? I'm wearing headphones right now, too.
Oh, okay.
I'm not hearing an echo.
Huh. Well, it's better now. Okay. Sorry.
Hopefully it isn't me.
That was weird.
Okay, whatevs. People in the chat, if you hear an echo, just send up a flare.
Yeah,
okay,
let us know if you hear anything.
Let us know. Go.
Yeah, so the way that it worked is that, I was really into the drummer for a long time, and that's the guy, Peter, in the story about Unconditional Love. And we had kind of decided not to date after he inevitably was going to break up with his girlfriend and all that. There is a little bit of an echo still, Ishmael. I can hear it a little bit.
Weird.
Is it just Lirpa?
Yeah, I can hear it on you too, PJ. Actually, the only person I don't hear it for you, Steven.
Maybe it's me.
Maybe it is.
Let me turn down the volume and see if we're getting feedback. Okay, say something now.
Something now.
I don't think I heard anything. Oh, okay. Great. I think we're fixed.
My volume was just up too high. It was
right on.
Giving feedback. Okay, sorry about that.
Oh, right. I don't know. Where was I? So we had decided like we wouldn't be a good couple anyway. And we were just going to go back to being normal friends. And then at that point, me and one of the guitarists started talking a lot. And anyway, I guess Peter wasn't quite over it. He got really angry when the guitarist tried to ask him if he could date me, basically, because he was like, it has to be cool with my band, So anyway, that was the whole thing. Me and Peter stopped talking for like a month, and then the other guy, the guitarist, stopped talking to me for a while after that because I told Peter they were going to kick him out of the band. It was just like a whole
such a
ridiculous thing.
Jesus.
Yeah,
that's
was some funny drama. So that's what I wrote about.
I will say drummers are hot.
Yeah, it's true.
They're athletic.
They are extremely athletic, much like
I'm partial to
athletes.
guitar players, but maybe I'm biased.
I married one of those, so
Good choice.
PJ, what did you write this week?
So my most recent piece was called "The Venture Brothers and the Unsexy Nature of Heroism." Have either of you seen Venture Brothers?
no,
Nope.
but now I want to after I read
Yeah,
your piece.
it was like a early 2000s Adult Swim show. It ran for like 17 years and had 7 seasons, so it was one of those very like um, passion projects. But I kind of wrote about how I'd seen a lot of other like superhero parody TV shows, like The Boys and Invincible, and they were just so very cynical about the very concept of heroism. And what I wrote about is the Venture Bros started out like that, but kind of and I guess the thesis was the Venture Bros like starts out like that, but the real nature of heroism is like, yep, they're in this fucked up world where it's kind of huge superhero parody. A lot of it is corrupt. It's like a superhero super villain industrial complex, and it's about continuing to keep living and do stuff in the world, even though it's corrupt and fallen, instead of just the boys, for example, being very dark and very cynical.
I
So
haven't seen The
that's what I try to
Boys
get
either.
across. Um, it's
Yeah.
okay. The first
Sorry,
two
I'm putting
seasons,
on a sweater. I'll be right there.
it's okay. Yeah, The Boys. It's one of those shows that like it's an interesting concept. I don't know if you've seen like Game of Thrones either, but any of those like more dark, cynical deconstructions, like at least to me, like they very rarely have anything to say. Um, so I don't know. The Venture Bros has a little bit more to say because it's just, yep. Oh,
Yeah.
what if Superman were a violent, murderous rapist? Wouldn't that be crazy?
Right. Yeah, that was really I liked I think I disagreed with you initially when you had said something about how like the heroes are too nuanced or something to that effect, or like or not, or maybe it was villain, or like it was less black and white, heroism versus like villainy or whatever. But the way that you put it in this piece, like about how, after a while, if you're just like talking about what the problems are, not offering any solutions or ways to help, that's not really what we want to be going for either. I liked that. It made a
Mhm.
lot of sense to me.
That's what I tried
Hmm.
for. But yeah, it was a fun one. I'm doing a lot of, as our to be released podcast tomorrow. I talked about like I've kind of pulled away from political writing, so I'm trying to experiment and doing like lots of different cultural writing and stuff right now. So that was one that I've been sitting on for a little while. Oh, hey, kitty, one of the many kitties.
Which one is
Yes,
that?
this is Luna. This is Luna. She's our
Hello, Lana.
Maine Coon.
Oh, Maine Coon.
She is pretty.
Yeah,
Hmm.
she's very pretty. No, I mean the concept of I feel like Game of Thrones really crystallized this cynicism about hero narratives in the popular culture, at least in fantasy. So listening to you talk, my mind went to fantasy. So
Hmm.
there's like hero narratives in superhero movies and shows and books and so on. And but then you get books like Watchmen by um,
Alan Moore.
Alan Alan Moore, which kind of breaks
Mm.
down the heroism. And I feel like, and then in fantasy, we have like the grim dark subgenre and Game of Thrones, which like breaks down the kind of idealism of light versus dark, good versus evil, kind of the Lord of the Rings style, kind of absolute good personified in Gandalf and Aragorn versus the absolute evil of Mordor. But then you get Game of Thrones, which kind of brings ambiguity into all of that, which I think is good, but it gets to the point where it feels cynical. And I think that that's what
Yeah,
you're speaking to
Hmm.
is there's a
Yeah.
that's what I
cynicism
tried to.
about heroism. And I think one of the reasons why Brandon Sanderson does I think one of the keys to his appeal is that he isn't cynical. His books are the least cynical books in the like in fantasy. They're just so
Hmm.
like unadulterated, celebration of heroism. And I think that that might be why people love him so much. It's like a correction.
Yeah, I think he's definitely the anti-grimdark, and there's a lot
He
of
is the
great. And I don't want
anti-grimdark.
to, yeah, because originally I made a note, and I think it was my most popular note. Maybe that's what you're referencing, Lirpa. I said, I'm tired of all like the deconstruction. Oh, the what if the hero were bad? What if the
That's what I'm
monster
thinking
was
of too.
misunderstood?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want more and I didn't literally mean black and white, but I do black and white morality because it's good to have a nuanced view. But like for example, Game of Thrones, like I stopped watching after season 4 because it was I just remember thinking like, okay, what is the point of this? It's just kind of dark and miserable. And like at the time it came out, especially at the time that it was written, it was something that was fresh and interesting. And when the show came out, I feel like your average normie like was aware of like Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings when it came to fantasy.
Mhm.
Um, Whereas like at a certain, and it seems like I know what happened in the show. Like when you're doing this dark deconstruction of like what if the king was actually evil or what's Aragorn's tax policy? It's to me, it's ultimately kind of uninteresting because you don't say anything. You can either double down on the cynicism and the darkness, and like if Game of Thrones would have followed through on that, I let's be real, George R. R. Martin, not R. R. George R. R. Martin is not going
Yeah.
to finish that book series.
Yeah.
If it were like to actually follow through, it would be like some random warlord like Ragnar the baby rapist becomes king of the Iron Throne and uses the dragons to do terrible things, or you can like completely subvert the subversion and actually the good guy became king at the end, which is what happened. And I don't know, it's just narratively unsatisfying. There's not a narratively satisfying way to do that. Whereas I think you're right.
Yeah.
I've kind of lost. I don't know. I haven't read Brandon Sanderson in a couple years. I think I read the what was the third one, Warbreaker of the
Yeah.
Stormlight.
Yep.
I liked that one, but I've heard there's been diminishing returns, and the things that he's doubled down on are not the things that I liked, and the things that he has moved away from are the things that I did like, and more so just like the more Marvelization of it. But I think you're right. He takes that cynicism that exists and he does something more interesting. I really like the Mistborn series, for example.
Yeah.
But
Mistborn is
Stormlight, I
great.
need to finish reading. And
Yeah.
we have a couple. This is a very long. Okay, let me read this Baz's comment real quick.
Okay.
Agreed. I actually find it very boring. No one can be a good person in today's American cultural landscape where cynicism has long reigned. It's an interesting thought that while cynicism has proliferated in American media, it hasn't affected other cultural forms like Japanese anime. I don't think it's a coincidence that anime has exploded in popularity during the same time period.
Hmm.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
would agree.
Yeah.
I'm not
Same.
there. I would say there's anime that I like, but I'm not like necessarily a fan of the genre. But and again, like theater, like positive is not the right word because there's that toxic positivity which can be kind of hokey. But there's been a lot of really great animes that I think are able to walk that line a little bit more.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think one show that did like complex villain really well was obviously Breaking Bad. But the difference the difference to me between something like Breaking Bad and Game of Thrones, where Walter White is kind of an anti-hero, clearly a villain, also deeply human, he goes on this transformation, is that he's masterfully human. Like his you get the sense all the way through that he's a human, whereas in a lot of the more cynical portrayals of heroes and villains, I don't actually get the feeling that they're human, right? Like you get the
Yeah.
feeling that they're making a point about human frailty. You get the feeling that the creator is making a broader point about human about the narrative itself of heroes and villains rather than looking
Mhm.
at an actual human being. Dear Citizen says we love Steven's cat. Thank you. I love
We
her
do.
too. She's the best. She's being very
She
affectionate
she
right now.
is a beautiful
I'm
cat.
I'm holding on to her because she bites my legs if I don't. So we'll just have lots of
Mhm.
Luna right now.
I can live with
Um
lots of Luna.
Yeah.
Yeah, she is the best.
Mhm.
Um,
And to Publius Americanus says, Breaking Bad is a Faustian tragedy, very relatable. Yeah, that it feels like almost Greek tragedy as well.
yes, totally. Ishmael says, interesting point. Demon Slayer, My Hero Academia, Mob Psycho, all relentlessly good-hearted protagonists. Um, yeah, agreed.
Mhm. And
Um,
that's what I tried to. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
no. Go for it.
No, I was just going to say that that's what I liked about the Venture Brothers, where like it's a dark and cynical world, like where his dad, the character, he's like the main character, one of the main characters is Doctor Venture, and he's like a Johnny Quest type figure. He used to be a boy adventurer who like never really lived up to his father's legacy or his like legacy of when he was a kid and a boy adventurer. He kind of peaked when he was like 9 years old, which is difficult to deal with. And his dad was like part James Bond, part Howard Hughes, part Tony Stark, but he was like a horrible psychopath. And instead of just being like, fuck it, the world is evil. I'm just going to be cynical. Like he's still trying to do good, and he's a flawed. All the characters are flawed people trying to still do their own thing in a world that's flawed. Instead, it's evil, burn it down, let's kill Superman.
Hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
very interesting. Yeah, I mean, yeah,
I think that's
I've
something.
been sorry, go on.
I was just reading the comment. I don't mean to keep interrupting.
No,
Dear
you're good.
citizen says, thank God somebody else knows about Johnny Quest. Yeah, I saw all those shows. It was a little bit before my time. It was all like reruns when I was a kid in the '90s. All that Hanna Barbera stuff.
I remember Johnny Quest. Yeah. Okay,
I've been watching Dexter again. I don't even know what time this is of like rewatching that show, but that's like I don't know, maybe the OG like is the villain actually good maybe sort of show, which
Mhm.
now looking at it, I mean it's still good, but I wonder if that couldn't even be like people would not be interested in that show today. I think for the same reason that you're talking about, PJ, like it's I don't know. Everyone does kind of crave something more. Everyone's tired of cynicism, is what I'd say. Personally,
Mhm.
I think we're all kind of collectively a little over it. However it manifests itself. Just wonder.
Yeah, I tried to watch it years ago, and it was just like I don't know, I found it a little corny, and this is one of those things that I feel like if I had watched it when it came out, it would have been more novel.
Yeah,
But it was just like it feels like something I would have written when I was like 15. Like I'm a serial killer, but I only kill other serial killers who are bad. So it's cool. I'm a cool, edgy, badass psychopath. But
right.
it was interesting, but it was a little dated, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. I think it came out exactly when it needed to. I started watching
Mhm.
it like 2 years late because I had just gotten done with 6 Feet Under and Michael C. Hall. I wanted 6 Feet Under to keep going, and so I just watched the newest Michael C. Hall thing, thinking it would do the trick. And I don't know. Have you guys seen 6 Feet Under?
no.
No, what's that one
Okay,
about?
well, never. Well,
I'm
it's just in brief. It's just that HBO show from like the early 2000s about the family that owns a funeral home. But yeah, all time favorite show. It was
Oh
super good.
yeah.
Yeah.
Was that the one where they like brought people back from the dead or something to solve crimes, or am I thinking of something completely different?
Oh, you're thinking of something different. You might be thinking of Pushing Daisies, although that might be a concept
Yeah,
that's in a
yeah,
few things. Yeah, that
that
was an
was it.
interesting one. I liked it. It was cute. I like his style, Brian Fuller.
Mhm.
But yeah.
if the
Anyway, I'll
cat
get off
is
that tangent.
if the cat is interfering with the microphone, I'm sorry. Can you hear the
I
You
can
can
hear
puppy?
hear
her
her
purring,
purr a
but I
little
love it.
bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're getting purring ASMR. So we'll just
Yes.
keep the purring. Awesome. So this week I wrote two articles. Um, I wrote one called On Emerging from a Bipolar Episode, which was just kind of chronicling what it's what it's like to come out of a very dark mental space. Um, and so I write a lot. Jesus Christ, I love you. Um, what do you want? What are you doing? Do you want to be on my? Do you want to? Hold
She
on.
wants to annoy you and have you pay attention to her and not do this straining
Here,
thing.
here. Okay, you can be on my shoulder. You just need to be well positioned. Oof. Okay. Okay. She's a shoulder cat, so she'll be right there.
Mhm.
Okay. Um uh yeah, so the article was about how um I've written I've written about many aspects of living with bipolar. So I've written about hypomania, which are the highs. I've written about the lows. I've written about just all of these various aspects of the experience. And then I decided that I also wanted to write about what it's like to come out of the experience, because there it can be very abrupt and it can be very intense. To The best metaphor I have is that it's like a possession, where you I feel like there's this thing holding onto my brain, and it's just indescribably painful and indescribably dark. And then I can like feel it loosening, and then it just lets go. And coming out of that is just an extraordinary it is an extraordinary relief. And that's where I've been all week long, is in that state of just, oh, thank God. Like, and I'm not having to like mask and pretend to be um sociable and normal. I'm not having to like put in that enormous effort to cover what's going on beneath the surface. Um, and there is not that cognitive load anymore. And so that article is just a brief reflection on the enormous gratitude that I feel when the storm breaks. And it is extraordinarily lovely. I mean, it's just this feeling of like, oh my God, the being able to drink coffee in the morning on my porch, best fucking thing in the world, and just not be um and not have the head crabs, as a friend of mine calls it. Um
It's the little
and
things.
yes. So that was the latest piece. And then before that, also this week, I wrote an article called "The Lost Vows of Friendship." And in this article, I I basically argue that culturally we devalue friendship, and that we have really lost veneration for friendship and understanding of the intimate. We have lost respect for and an understanding of the sort of intimacy that can exist between friends, and how important that intimacy, emotional intimacy, is. And then in the article, I go through several examples of what I call covenant friendships. So I use biblical stories, the story of David and Jonathan, where it says Jonathan loved David as his own soul, and his soul was knit to David's. And then they have this vow, which is really beautiful. This section in First Samuel. And then there is the extraordinary friendship vow, friendship covenant between Ruth and Naomi in the book of Ruth, where Ruth tells Naomi, "Where you go, I will go. Your people shall be my people. Your God shall be my God. Where you die, I shall be buried." Um, and then there are several other examples that I give. My favorite is the rite of brother making in the Byzantine Empire, um, where there were three ways to extend legally and ritualistically extend the family. And we know we still practice one, we're vaguely familiar with the second, and we have all but lost the third. So the first, of course, is marriage, the union between a man and a woman, legally recognized, religiously recognized. The second one was the right of godparenthood, And godparenthood, and I didn't get into this in the article, but it's also very cool. Godparenthood was essentially an extension of the family for co-parenting. So the parents of a child would choose another man to basically come and co-parent and be the spiritual mentor for this child. And this bond, this covenant was taken so seriously that that child would not be able to marry any of the children of the godparent because they were blood, right? So they were considered family. Um, and then the third is what's called adelphopoiesis, literally the right of making brothers. And it was a friendship covenant between two men. Now, there are several scholars who have tried to argue that these were homosexual, and I think that that is incredibly incorrect. Um, to me, that's like saying the pyramids were built by aliens. What it ultimately does is it narrows the range of human affection, and it narrows the range of the imagination of human love. And instead, what I think is clear is that we have lost an appreciation for profound friendship, for deep friendship. And we see friendship as playing second fiddle to romance. And I think that's tragic. And so instead of demoting marriage and eros, erotic love, um, what I argue for in the article is to elevate it, elevate the other loves and elevate friendship. And then I go through lots of literature. I quote Seneca. I quote C.S. Lewis. I draw from Arthurian legend. I draw from Song of Roland. I mention briefly what's called the spiritual friendship or the holy friendship between Teresa of Avila and Saint John of the Cross. Where Teresa of Avila was an older woman, she was in her 50s. Saint John of the Cross was in his 20s. Two of the greatest saints and mystics in Catholic mysticism. And they had this very, very deep, holy friendship. And it was a sort of partnership. It was a kind of partnership. Um, and so friendship can come in all kinds of configurations. I tried to offer different examples of it, where between the sexes and so on. But the point being that I think we I think a lot of people are very lonely, and one of many reasons why people are lonely is because we invest all of our loneliness into a romantic relationship, right? So, and I think that that's ultimately unfair to the spouse. That's ultimately unfair to our partners. Um, and then I conclude with a story about a friendship ritual that I did with two friends of mine. They're a married couple, David and Angie, and how, we all met at work and they eventually fell in love and they got married. And David is one of my best friends, and I'm very close with Angie. And they and the three of us just became very, very tight. And then they eventually moved away to live with Angie's parents, or to live close to their parents. And David asked me to do a friendship ritual before they left. And so I wrote a ritual from scratch. And so the rest of the article is just a reflection on how powerful that ritual was, and how cathartic and powerful, and how I really feel bonded to David and Angie, where it's like before we were close friends, even dear friends. But after that ritual, it's like, oh, this is something new. This is friends and this is friendship in covenant. And that has greater stakes. It's like I'm locked in more. Um, and it's important to say friendship is freely given. Friendship is kind of amorphous and feral in a way that marriage is not, right? And that's the way it should be. Um, friendship is free of a lot of the contractual obligations of marriage. In a friendship, you don't have to do. Cinema says, "Are you guys going to do a friendship ritual live on the air?"
That's
No,
how our throuple is going to be officialized.
it's going to be.
Yeah,
We will be.
we
We
are.
will actually be the first Substack. We should do a friendship ritual. We should do a thruple ritual
Yeah.
on Substack Live and make history as the first thruple to
Let's
do
do
it
Mhm.
it.
on Substack.
Breaking ground.
Um, okay, so all that all that to say, um, friendship doesn't need ritual, right? I'm not saying that friendship requires ritual or needs ritual. And in fact, in many ways, friendship might be better off without it because it's free from like the contractual obligations, depending on the friendship. It's free from the contractual obligations of marriage, where with a friend, you don't have to decide you don't have to work on your finances together, right? You don't have to stress over meal prep together, right? So um the so friendship is it doesn't require ritual, but I do think that to deepen it is an option. And making it friendship vows, the law, and the article is called The Lost Vows of Friendship, making vows. Rowan says, "Speak for yourself. I make all my friends do my taxes." That's what I should do.
Smart move,
Um,
Rowan.
and history is full of friendship vows, and the friendships that I alluded to, David and Jonathan, Ruth and Naomi, the knights in King Arthur's court, and so on. That's just the beginning of the long history of friendship vows and the depth of friendship that we have, that people can have. So that was the basic. That was the article, and I kick it off over to you for comments.
I'm
Yeah, I
curious, do
really
you
enjoyed that
guys
article. So go ahead. I
did you
just wanted to say I really enjoyed that.
oh no, that's okay.
Good,
I
thank
enjoyed
you.
it too. I was just curious. It made me think of um like becoming so-called blood brothers or blood sisters or whatever, like
Hmm.
where you cut your palm and then like shake each other's hands,
Hmm.
so that like you're blood related. I wonder, I never did that, but I knew a lot of people who did. I
So
just
that
had
is
like the necklaces or whatever,
Hmm.
but
that is quite ancient, actually.
Hmm.
Blood brother. So I have a friend who's doing quite a bit of research. Um, so it so the blood brother thing that goes back very far to, I think, Scandinavian and Germanic folklore.
hmm,
It makes
Um,
sense.
yeah, so that goes back to folklore, and then there's another concept that I just learned about called anamkara, I believe. Anamkara, yeah, anamkara, which means soul friend in it's an Irish word for soul, or Gaelic for soul friend, and it is the word for that for what it sounds like, a kind of a soulmate who is a friend. And and so just all that to say, like, history and literature is full of this stuff, whereas today we relegate so much of that intimacy to romantic love. And this isn't to lower the stature of romantic love. Romantic love is incredible. Instead, my view is that these loves just kind of exist in they are interdependent with each other.
Hmm.
And a strong friendships make a sexual partnership, a marriage, healthier. And I think very often a healthy marriage will make friendships healthier. And so they are interconnected, right? And we don't have to ask, we don't, they are, it isn't a competition. We don't have to ask, like, which one is more holy, which one is more pure, which one is more spiritual, which one is more loving. We don't we don't they aren't in competition. They are of different types of love. Um, so that yeah, that's the basic premise, and I've been very interested in friendship just as a concept, um, because I'm also interested in men's issues, and men are expressing some unique challenges when it comes to friendship. And so I've been digging into that. The
Hmm.
self-governess. Well, first, worst boyfriend ever says, having friends must be nice. Um, we'll be
It's
your
good stuff.
friend,
Hmm.
worst boyfriend ever. Although, will we?
Hmm.
Will we? We love you, worst boyfriend ever.
We'll see.
Um, and then the self-governess. This is exactly what I'm missing that I always had with at least one woman at a time. I think it's really tough without this friendship. I
Hmm.
gave the last one of these up I gave the last one of these up like 5 years ago. It's hard to find the next bosom friend. Anne of Green Gables term. Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
So, and that actually I think gets to something that's really quite hard and scary, which is I think the older we get. So I'm in my 30s, and just like it is so much harder to make friends in my 30s than it was in my 20s. It it
Hmm.
feels like it gets progressively harder the older I get to make good friends. And that's another reason why I've started digging into the research and history of friendship is because I am like it's getting harder for me to make friendships. And so how do I make friendships as I'm about to tip into middle age?
Hmm.
um,
It does get harder. There's
yeah, exactly.
two things that occur to me if I can jump in.
Totally.
The first one being I don't know if you guys remember, since we're, I guess this is uh we're kind of this is aging millennial stack, I guess. But when Lord of the Rings first came out, there were so many jokes that Frodo and Sam were gay, right? Because and it's really interesting. I think Lord of the Rings and Tolkien's work in general is a really good example of this older and I think that's what Tolkien was consciously trying to invoke these older ritualistic aspects of culture that Tolkien was self consciously trying to create, like a
Yes.
modern mythology for England because he felt, and he was a man who was deeply religious himself, but because of the rise of Christianity, a lot of the indigenous traditions of England had been lost. And to that point, like these deeper male friendships that like everybody always makes the gay jokes about Lord of the Rings, which I mean to me like one of the main things is maybe you could even I don't think that was what Tolkien intended, but you could read Frodo at least as gay, but you can still no, small spoiler for our conversation that's getting released tomorrow, but you can have a platonic friendship even if two people are gay. Um,
Hmm.
and that's something that has really been lost. Even as recently as like World War II, you see these images of like male soldiers who are, holding hands. You talk about the Soviet fraternal kiss. And it's something that I find really interesting that how and why we lost it. There's so much that goes into it. But the other thing that occurred to me when you're talking about ritualized friendships is like, we joked about being, like a Substack throuple because we're talking more and more and making more content with each other. But it makes me think of some of the early days of Mormonism. And, I only have one source on this, so, take it with a grain of salt, but how polygamy in Mormonism was originally in the context of this religious group that was an oppressed minority, and so they didn't have the same social structures to fall back on. And polygamy, the idea at least, was to extend the franchise of the family outwards from just a traditional monogamous couple, and taking in um, another woman and her kids and making the kind of extending that franchise essentially. So, and obviously, like I don't think we need to look very far to the degrees that polygamy was used and abused in a way that was exploitative. That having been said, I found that very interesting, at least philosophically, of not having, you want to have that level of friendship and deeper community and trying to formalize it in some way, but they only had so much language and so much existing social structures. So that was initially, I guess, apparently the philosophical conceit behind, to the degree that that's actually what it was about, is obviously debatable. But that was the idea behind it, which I found very interesting.
That is interesting. I'm let's read some comments here.
Yeah.
Baylor said something really interesting, which was, I've heard someone say we take divorce seriously, but we take the end of friendship less so. True. I've lost a friend in the last year or so. I've underestimated the pain at every turn. Yes. So, I have talked to people, and so I've talked to people, and I have also personally experienced the loss of friendship. And there's this real sense that language and appreciation for friendship has gone fallow. It's like we've lost a cultural context, in my view, of appreciating and talking about the loss of a friendship. So like a friendship breakup. That's a real heartbreak. Oh, but we live in a culture where it's like we all know what a romantic breakup is like and how much that hurts. And it's like, you know, we all know what it's like to be broken up with and just be doubled over in that incredible pain of that heartbreak, right? And we can all kind of sympathize with it. But when there's a friendship breakup, I think that in my experience, that's more lonely because there's less of a there's less of a context to acknowledge it. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, it's kind of what I
Yeah.
was getting at with
Yeah.
talking about polygamy in the Mormon context of because we just don't have words or institutions to describe it anymore. So, trying to extend that structure past what it would have been traditionally, I, obviously it's not a one to one, but having gone through that as well, um, it it's there's just not really language to describe it.
I think like friend breakup sometimes it's for me, the last time it happened to me, I think it took me, I was still so angry about it, even several years later, and whereas like a romantic relationship, I might not still be so angry, and maybe that has to do with like, there's no real, I don't know if there's no closure, healing process, or it's the kind of feeling like with a romantic relationship, if you break up, you eventually will probably find someone else. And while there's like the edge cases where, you never get over someone or whatever, for the most part, you do and you move on. And
Yeah.
with friendships, though, maybe it's because there's no real grieving period. There's no, official end. There's no actual real closure in a lot of those cases. And if we don't
Totally.
recognize that, maybe that's what, causes that extended sort of grief period.
Well, I'm
Well, also, sorry, go ahead.
no, 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 go, go.
Oh, well, I was going to say also there's well, again, when you're talking about a romantic relationship that ends, there's like cultural touchstones that you can look towards. There's movies, TV shows, books,
Yeah.
songs. You can like have your breakup playlist, but there's not really. I'm trying to think of. I'm sure there's examples that'll come to us, and if chat has anything, please by all means. I'm trying to think of like contemporary because you're talking about all these historical documents and they're literally biblical as opposed to like what is a contemporary media. I had a friend break up because then again we're using when we say breakup relation like
Hmm.
romantic language, but there's not
Exactly.
like wow me and my friend had a big fight or we grew apart or we have some ideological difference that can't be bridged. There's not really a lot that I can think of off the top of my head.
Yeah, I
That's
really
right.
can't think of anything either, unless it's just sort of, a
Hmm.
side note in a book about something else, or, something to that effect.
Hmm.
Absolutely. Let me read what the self-governess said. She says, by the way, love you, self-governess. Glad you're here. She says, besides one woman, I've been blessed with close male platonic friends since high school. I missed that. It's like not allowed at 43 and coupled, and many men don't just want that, which is challenging to navigate. So it becomes another blockade to potential friendship. Absolutely. And then she goes on, I don't know if we even realize how the grief um, I don't know if we even realize how the grief of that operates on us over time. A lot of time friend breakups happen differently, like a slow burning separation. Yes, that's right. Okay, so
Yeah.
on that note, um, my friend David, he's anonymous on Substack. He just goes by David, but he writes really beautifully about friendship, and he wrote this article called Relationship Itinerancy, where he's a Christian and he is determining a call to celibacy. And but he writes about why that's so scary for him. And this is what he says. Um, this condition, these worries constitute relational itinerancy. You see, I'm worried about these questions being like, will I die alone? Who will care for me? Who will I spend holidays with? Who will I spend the weekends with? Et cetera, right? Okay. So you see, I'm worried about these questions because no one values friendship here. I seem destined to wander through friendships, being with the same people for a few months or years at a time, but never reaching a point of stability. Not once have I ever heard someone turning down a big job offer to stay in his current location for a friend, for a romantic partner, perhaps, but not a friend. I have no ability to hope that anyone will not dump me at the sight of the slightest economic upward movement. Do you have any idea how debilitating this is, to believe that no one will ever see you as more valuable than $5,000 a year? I'm worth less than a car.
Oof.
And
Man.
I think that I I think that that crystallizes it, which is that that is how we treat friendships. Friendships are worth less to us than a car. And um there, in our podcast together, we talked about the three forms of loneliness. So there is intimate loneliness, there is relational loneliness, and then there is communal loneliness. And intimate loneliness is the loneliness for a romantic partner, someone to have sex with, someone to wake up to in the morning, all that, someone to pair bond with. But then there's relational loneliness, and that's friendship. And then there is communal loneliness, and that is having connection with a broader community oriented around a higher cause that you can feel in service to. And um, I feel like all of these are kind of in various states of disrepair. Like all three of those are in various states. They're like in dire straits. But I think the one that is most in dire straits right now is friendship. That's just me. I also think community is pretty fucked up right now. Um, so yeah, what are your? I've been rambling. I've been monologuing. So please end the monologuing.
Let me read Baz's comment real quick, and then it sounds like
Yeah,
Lirpa has something to say. Baz says, that's interesting. This is a very American phenomenon. Travel around the world, and you'll see a very different social fabric. Yeah,
absolutely.
absolutely. I feel like it's, I think, and it's like a function of like a particular subset of American culture, this very like, how do I want to put it? You still do see that somewhat, I think, in more traditional parts of America. Um, but yeah, I think we have for sure lost that. And I remember like, I would make friends from other countries, specifically male friends who I feel like would have more of a language for that, particularly like people from the Middle East. And again, kind of the same thing where I saw like, it's common for like men to hold hands and stuff like that,
Mm-hmm.
which, obviously people make the gay joke, but I do, it's something that's really lost and I miss. And recently I had him on my podcast. I haven't posted yet. My childhood best friend, where um, we we didn't exactly have a falling out in the sense of like, oh, fuck you. It's just we grow apart. We kind of like had a little bit of friction near the end of our friendship before we both went our separate ways because at that time I was super, super liberal, woke, whatever you want to call it. And he was like hyper conservative, very like anti gay and stuff. We butted heads on that. But over the last couple of years, we reconnected and started being friends, and I think maybe, and again, we talked about this in our first conversation, Stephen, that religion is one of these things that gives people a a small sense of ritual that comes with that. And like I remember him telling me, like, I'll never stop loving you. And like it has me a little bit choked up now just because it is a type of friendship that, that's the really deep friendships that
Mm-hmm.
um sorry, yeah, it's you can pick up again after years and years of not talking to each other and still have a rapport with each other. And that's, I think,
Yeah.
the phrase that I've used that I think you liked as well, Stephen, like my favorite type of person is always somebody, we're not always on the same page, but we're in the same book. Like I can see where you're coming from. And even if we have these differences, my friend that I was talking about, we've both kind of softened our stances, but we do have differences in worldview and values, but we can still respect each other. Like, yeah, I see where you're coming from. Like, we grew up together. I know your family. I know why you're like that. You know why I'm like that. But we can still be respectful.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And what you were just saying about being able to have a friendship across long stretches of time reminds me of this poem, Emily Dickinson, who's my favorite poet. Uh, she writes, "Long years apart can make no breach a second cannot fill." And then my favorite line, "The absence of the witch does not invalidate the spell. The embers of 1,000 years uncovered by the hand that fondled them when they were fire will stir and understand." And I love that because especially the line, "The absence of the witch does not invalidate the spell." Where it's like, we all, I think, hopefully we all have those friendships where it's like, oh my God, I haven't seen this person in 3 years, but then
Yeah.
you sit down and you talk and it's just like right there. And so the absence of the witch does not invalidate the spell. Um, but there was an article that I read. This was last year. I keep like coming back to it and wanting to write some commentary about it because it was so powerful. But it was about, PJ, what you were saying about having differences and having to work through those differences with a friend. The reason What this article was saying is that the reason why we find various forms of cancellation so painful, the reason why we find splitting over political difference, is because it reveals that the friendship was in the service of a broader political gain.
Yeah.
And that is fundamentally dehumanizing, in a way that fundamentally devalues friendship, where, according to the great philosophers, the classics, the friendship is a good unto itself. It is a good unto itself and ought to be pursued unto itself, as a good in itself. But when we part ways with a friend over political differences, um, what it reveals is that the friendship, that we were just a pawn in this person's political goals. At least that is what it seems to reveal. That is the message that is sent. And that is why falling out over politics are so devastating for everyone, because it fundamentally sends the message: you never saw me for who I was you were using me as a pawn in your political game. And that is in the interest of furthering a political goal.
Yeah.
The self-governance as a good unto itself. We've lost that. It's political and it's social status. That's not why we should have someone as our friend. Yes, absolutely.
Mhm.
Yeah. So, so I try to base my friendships off of integrity and character. I try to judge my friendships on the basis of character. Seneca says, first judge your friends. Before you make a friend, judge your friend, judge their character. And then he says, once you become a friend, you should share everything with them. Seneca has like this advice for finding a bro. He has like this letter to young Lucilius where he is, advising him on how he ought to find a friend and how to do that. And but he says you must judge your friend before you share. And so I really try to base my friendships on their character. Do they have strong character? Do they have integrity? And if they have integrity, then I'm willing to work with a lot of disagreement. And I'm much less willing to be friends with someone who might agree with me on every single point, but might be a terrible person. I've known people like
Mhm.
that. I've known people where it's like, damn, we agree on everything practically, but you are a terrible human being. And so I would rather have someone who I disagree with on some important subjects, but but like PJ says, we're in the same book, right? Like I want to be in the same book
Mhm.
with someone and I want to judge them based on their character and have them as friends based on their character rather than on how aligned they are with my political goals, right?
Yeah, and obviously there are exceptions, right? Like I understand, like if somebody's like, Steven, you're gay, so I think you're degenerate and you're going to hell based on. I think that's something that's understandable. That having been
Mm-hmm.
said, I think there's a lot more wiggle room than people are willing to give it credit for. And I think we have all talked about and wrote about existing in more like left wing liberal spaces, and seeing the negative side of that. And again, that was something we discussed in our first conversation, but it's definitely something that cuts both ways. And as we discussed earlier today, like these. These reactions, these strong reactions don't come from nowhere.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I do understand where people are coming from that as well, because I've had friends who, have lost people lost family for their sexuality or their worldviews. And I think that's what, we talked about. That's why it can hurt so much when you would think like you should know better than this. We've been through this. Why are you doing this to me? Like I thought we would at least be able to have some kind of dialogue and understand each other, you know?
Yeah.
Hmm. What are
Yeah,
your
that
thoughts, Lirpa? Yep.
well, I think when it comes to losing friends, especially this day and age when it's like about political views or you're being, canceled or whatever. I mean, in addition to like having I think I have a few thoughts on this. So one, because this is what happened to me with that friendship I was talking about before, how I was still so angry about it years afterwards because, in addition to feeling like she never actually knew me all along or something, I mean, this was a friend I had had since like 2005. And in addition to feeling like maybe she never really knew me or she didn't care unless she thought I agreed with certain things like as a political pawn whatever we were talking about. There's also the fact of like your mutual friends. We had tons and tons of mutual friends and a lot of them just took her side, because in that sort of world, the people who cancel, you kind of just have to believe
Hmm.
whoever's telling you someone is canceled and the reasons why and all of that. And there are people who are just willing to do that without any sort of questioning. And so, there's that whole mess to go through as well as like the friendship itself, because maybe you have fewer actual friends. But in my situation, she had gone on like a canceling spree. So I ended up just kind of becoming friends with other people she canceled. So that was kind of interesting. But you know, it just adds to the pain of that, because and at the same time, though, the other branch I wanted to take with this is that when you talk about, you know, people's character rather than their views, I think, and I kind of wrote about this in my pillow talk, partisans and pillow talk thing, about how your values should be similar, or how that's really, I think, more important than voting the same way. But it's kind
Mm-hmm.
of similar in that regard, because I think, though, that particular friend would have said that she thought that my character was different. And this was such a, like, in my opinion, such a tiny little thing that we even really disagreed about, but she kind of took it to mean other things, and without getting into it all. But, you know, like, that was her read. It was that she had misjudged my character, or that my character had really changed. And so I didn't think so. I thought the whole time, I was like, I've been the same person all along, you know? And I don't know. It's not, that's kind of thing. It's hard to resolve that, you know,
Yeah.
in addition to how much it sucks when it's happening.
I mean, it goes back to the previous point about closure, where, you know,
Yeah.
I have some friendships that I lost in a pretty bloody manner because in my 20s I was extremely volatile. Like I was an
Ooh, you and
unmedicated
me both, brother.
yes, I was an
Same.
unmedicated bipolar twink. Like I burned every fucking bridge with the exception of my best friend who's a drag queen and one guy named Dane who I love. He's one of my best friends. Everyone else burned every single bridge with. I was such a hot mess. And so I had a lot of friendships end in very ugly ways. I am the villain of some people's stories. And um some one the big turning I one of the biggest Jesus one of the really hard turning points for me, and I talked about this in our conversation with Andrew Perlott several weeks ago. How this in my 20s, this is I want to say my earlier mid 20s. No, it was early 20s because I was still in college when this happened. Really good friend of mine, a friend named Mandy. Really, we were best friends. We spent every weekend together hanging out. She was awesome. And she and I got into a really big argument, and that was the really the last time we talked. And then months later, she died in a car wreck,
Oh, no.
and I was just like, I never again want a friendship to end that way, right? I never again want a friendship to end on an argument. And that was really my last interaction with her, was us yelling at each other. And we really loved each other. But that was it. That was the last real connection that we had. And then she died in a car wreck. And so it just made me but and then, you know, when I was in not when I was in high school, when I was 19 years old, I survived a shooting. And I really bonded with one of the people who eventually was killed in the shooting. Um, and it's like if I hadn't, none of us know, there's a last time for everything, right?
Yeah.
There's a last time for every single thing. There's a last time that I'll kiss my husband. There's a last time that I'll pet my cat Luna. There's a last time that I will go to work. There's a last time that we will do this live stream. And we never know when that last time will be. And so that's the thing that try to remind myself of whenever I'm in anyone's presence, is that this could be the last time, because there have been many last times in
Yeah.
my life where that was the last time that I did that thing or talked to that person and I had no idea. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And
Baz
yeah.
says, sorry, go ahead.
No, go for it. Go for it.
No, I was going to say, Baz says, he really appreciates your vulnerability, and I do as well. And I think it's something I mean, I feel like that's the secret sauce of the Krabby Patty, right? To be able to
Yes.
be vulnerable, like, because at least for me personally, like, I talked to you guys about it. I have like a handful of people who I'm like, literally, ride or die for, but it's like under 10. And,
Yep.
not to give my whole life story, but, because of, you probably understand maybe to some degree, Stephen, like because of my dad's job that we were, he was a pastor, we moved around a lot. So I learned from an early age, just like, don't get attached.
Yeah.
You're a roll, what is was it? A Rolling Stone gathers no moss. So like later on in life, because I went very hardcore, edgy atheist and whatnot, and I tried to rediscover spirituality later in life. I looked at say Buddhism, for example, and I'm obviously not a scholar of Buddhism, right? That having been said, a lot of it was trying to um, remove yourself from attachment because attachment creates suffering. But not being attached is not a problem that I have. So Buddhism for me, like it was almost too easy, or at least the lack of attachment part, like to
Yeah.
actually be attached and say, yeah, we're gonna have a fight, but we can still find a way to work through it and to have accountability, holding people to accountability, and excuse me, and not like take it personally in the wrong way, if that makes sense, when people hold you
Totally.
accountable and be like, hey, because that's the thing. Like, I feel like if I were to give advice to myself as a young person or give advice to any young person, it's, there's this, and I think a lot of it's good and it comes from that, like, I maybe not necessarily that baby boomer. If you've ever read like Christopher Lash's Culture of Narcissism, there's this overemphasis on self-actualization and the self, and like oh, you only need to do things for you, and if you lose people, that's on them. I think that's true to a degree. That having been said, the advice I would give is like, you should care what some people think about it. Because just some random person, or if
Yes.
they don't actually have your best interest at heart or care about you, you shouldn't care about what they think. But if somebody is really close to you, like a close friend or family member, and they're saying, "Hey, you're fucking up," you're this is not good for you. I can tell that it's not good for you. You should be able to listen to that. And those are the people you should listen to, and those are the people you don't want to lose.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
To add on
Um,
that real quick, I think like one thing that this sort of loneliness epidemic that everyone is kind of going through right now in this loss of community, one thing that I've noticed personally since I've written about this and talked about it a little. I just got back from Minnesota where I was for a month, and because I was like just lonely out here because like I live in a different place than most of the people in my life. So one thing that I've noticed is that, for someone, especially someone more extroverted like I am, but for anybody, if you don't have like a regular connection to a lot of people like that who can actually call you out on things or hold you accountable or be concerned about you or just be there in general, you sometimes you need those people, you just need people in general to kind of keep you normal in a sense. And I say that with
Hmm.
quotation marks because like whatever that means for you, like to just kind of keep you grounded in a certain way, because it can be easy if you're alone a lot to either just get lost in your own head or to get lost even online where the tone is very different online, of course. And, in your head, I mean, you just get lost, you get lost there, right? So you really need
Hmm.
those. I don't know, maybe I just see a lot of connections between that and maybe people's unhinged behavior online sometimes, uh, we just don't have
yeah.
enough of those.
Well, so I have some friends who they will correct my perception about the world without even seeming to mean to. They,
Yeah.
like the example that comes to mind right now is um once when I was in a very dark headspace and I was spinning out and I called a friend or I sent him a voice text and I was like, I feel like I am in crisis right now. And and then he got back to me and he was like, you can feel really dark and you can feel really heavy, and that's not crisis. That's not a crisis. And the way, but he just very kind of simply illuminated that the severity of what I was feeling does not reflect the severity in the world or the actual severity of the situation. And that's what a good friend is for, is they can just kind of, sometimes incisively and directly, sometimes they need to do an intervention, but more often than not, it isn't an intervention. It's just like your perspective of the world just kind of bumps up against theirs, and in doing so, it's like, oh, I get a clearer picture. Um,
Yeah. Like sometimes that you
and
can, they zoom out
yeah,
for you a little bit.
exactly. They're able to zoom out, and that was exactly what I needed to hear at that
Mhm.
moment, because I was like, I'm fucking falling apart. I can't deal with this. And he was like, you're not in crisis. What are you talking about? You're fine. You're okay. You feel really dark and heavy and intense, and this is very painful, but you're fine. And that's the role of a good friend. But also, so several, when was this? This might have been last week. I wrote an article called, let me pull it up. Where is it? Where is it? Where is it? Where is it? I wrote an article called A Survival Guide to the Abyss. And which is like, here's what I know to do when hard shit happens. But the last point that I made was, you have to trade your cadabra. And what I mean by that is, when I was in middle school and I was hopelessly addicted to Pokemon. And Prester John, how old are you, by the way?
I am 33.
Okay, so did you play any of the Pokemon games on like the Game Boy?
Oh, of course. Yeah.
Okay, sweet. So you played Pokemon Yellow and Silver and Gold and all
All that,
that.
yeah. Up
Yes, okay,
through the
perfect.
third generation, then I kind
Yeah,
of fell off.
same. Yeah, perfect. And but on Pokemon Yellow, there was what I now think of as a brilliant game design, which is, in order to get my Kadabra to evolve to an Alakazam, I had to connect a cord from my Game Boy to a friend's Game Boy who used the opposite game. So if it was yellow, or if it was, silver,
Red
it
and
had to
blue, yeah.
be gold, or it was red, or it had to be blue, right? So um, and then I had to trade the Kadabra away, and then I had to trade it back, and only then would it evolve. And so it's like, the message that game design teaches is, you literally cannot advance. You literally cannot get further you can't level up your Pokemon until you collaborate with another person and trust them enough to trade it away. And so it like teaches vulnerability and trust. Like, okay, I'm
Hmm.
going to trade this thing. I'm going to trade my beloved Kadabra away, and then you get something back. But there's an inevitable vulnerability there. There's an innate, like, oh, that's uncomfortable. Um, and so it's like, now I remind myself, I have to trade my Kadabra.
Hmm.
I have to, or so I have to trade my Kadabra, or, to quote Seneca, make uh tr- act as if a friend is trustworthy, and you will make him trustworthy, right?
Hmm.
Uh, let's read some comments here. Let's see here.
Pokemon's
The
good at that. Just
governess.
to jump in real quick. Sorry.
Yes, go
Like, you
for it.
remember
Go for it.
Hmm.
Go for
Pokemon
it.
Go? That was the only Pokemon experience I had, was Pokemon Go back in, what was that, like 2016? And
Pokemon
Hmm.
Go is still around. I had no
is it,
idea.
that's
People are still
crazy.
People are into
playing
it.
it.
Well, yeah, I just remember the conversations when it came out. People were already complaining that everyone is just scrolling on their phones, and they were so happy that like teenagers and kids and, us 20 and 30 somethings also were like wandering around the neighborhood in
Hmm.
real life,
Got
to
people
play this
talking to each
game with
other.
strangers.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Weirdly enough, that was like one of the last, before everything I feel like got super crazy culture wars wise. That was like one of the last, like, oh, you're just going out and talking to random people who you know. And
Yeah.
like, I just had that memory of like, I think it was summer of 2016 before everything got crazy as we know that it did. Like, that was
Yeah.
last good memory before, not last good memory, but you know what I mean.
Yeah,
Yeah,
before shit went
exactly.
dark,
Right.
before the apocalypse, slow motion although it isn't a fucking
Hmm.
apocalypse. What am I saying? We're not in an apocalypse.
Hmm.
This isn't World War II. I mean, I won't say we'll be fine, but shit's been so much worse than it's been now, than it is now.
It has
That's
indeed.
true.
Keep
That's
talking.
true.
I am burning up, and I'm going to change my clothes real fast.
Well, I
Sure.
think we were going to read a comment, so let's see.
Pre
Oh,
Pokemon Go and post Pokemon Go. Yeah, that's the new AD and BC.
the new what?
The new AD and BC for like history. Like, it'll be
Oh,
pre
yes,
Pokemon Go, post Pokemon Go.
right. The
Yeah. Do you want
self-governance
to?
says, which is so tough if, oh, I think there was one before. This is challenging to people because they don't go back far enough, holding others accountable in a compassionate way. Go back far enough, like, let me read the second one, which is so tough if you are stuck in an endless cycle of friendship, in quotation marks, where every single thing you say and do is flawless and validated. Yeah, that's something that I think women can relate to, especially. And I found that incredibly frustrating myself. Like you have this sort of fake validation that doesn't even feel real. Where you're like calling each other, yeah, I mean that you're so flawless, all that stuff. It's very frustrating to me. I don't enjoy that particular ritual of female friendship because it's so phony. um,
Hmm.
but yeah, versus the new brunch girls. What is the new brunch girls? I'm not familiar with that. But but yeah, that's something that I've found. And I was, oh yeah, gassing each other up. Oh yes, for sure. And I was talking to someone about this recently. Like it feels, and I hate to say this because it's such a cliched thing to say, but that sort of thing feels like too much. Like I want to stop myself from saying too much drama so bad, but I mean, because it kind of fits into the whole thing. It just requires more work than it seems like it should. Whereas like one of my best friends that I've known since I was 12, who's a guy, like we don't really have to gas each other up or play those kinds of weird games. And since when everyone's aware that you're playing a game, I don't really understand the point of playing it. I don't know. It's kind of confusing to me. But yeah,
Hmm.
I completely relate to what you're saying. Yeah, it's something it seems like you have to tolerate if you want that kind of group. Like Stephen, you came
Hmm.
back. We were reading the self-governesses comments above
Yeah,
about, yeah,
female
yeah.
friendship. I've heard horror stories.
it,
Hmm.
it, it can sometimes feel like a minefield, but other times when it doesn't, it's wonderful. It's
Yeah,
like the whole sisterhood thing
Hmm.
is great, but it
yeah,
doesn't really, it seems
but
like they're very fragile. I don't know, in my experience.
yeah. I mean, same with brotherhood. I mean, we talked about this on the podcast that we did together, but it's interesting as a gay man how I still feel very much the need for like male friends.
Yeah.
And then there's also the need for um, a partnership. And that's complicated, but I just think that goes to show like um, same-sex friendships are very important. They are
They are.
extremely
Hmm.
important, and I'm kind of worried about what feels like a decline in male-only spaces.
Yeah.
It I don't it's one of those things that's hard to gauge whether it's actually a thing. I think it is, but it definitely feels like it's a thing. Like that
Yeah.
they're just
Hmm.
fewer male-only spaces. Um, Ishmael says, obviously friends can offer support, but I also need my friends to tell me when my head is firmly up my own ass. True. And
Hmm.
I have had friends to do that for me,
Hmm.
where they have taken me on a walk and been like, Stephen, you are fucking up so hard right now.
That's a sign of a
Same.
real friendship, I think.
Yeah, I think so.
The curtain just fell um, next to me. Anyway,
Literal
uh,
curtain.
a literal curtain just
I was
fell.
trying to figure out
Hmm.
if we
Hmm.
were speaking literally or not.
Prester John, you have had thinking face for a
That's
minute.
just what my face looks like. Yep.
Okay.
Resting asshole face, I guess.
Self-governance. You say, I actually think my gay friends have been the best at this. Say more about that because that's really interesting to me. While she's typing, so you're resting. So you don't have resting bitch face. You have resting think face.
I
There you go.
appreciate that. That's a
Resting
much nicer way
philosopher
of putting it.
face.
Resting
Because I had
philosopher face.
yeah, I could that I like resting philosopher face because I had funnily enough at my last job, um the one person I actually became friends with and reached out to me after I got laid off, and it was really touching. Then he was like, you you have like a very mean looking face, but you often say very nice things. I was like, oh, I can live with that.
That's funny. I
Mhm.
get told, Jesus, I'm knocking shit over. Um, I am I have the opposite of a mean face. I apparently just come off as way too nice. I'm way too kind and nice and sweet. I'm in the self-publishing fiction world. I think I'm what's called a cinnamon roll. Is like that's just the demeanor that I
Mhm.
have, and I wish that I didn't have that demeanor sometimes. I wish that sounds so stupid. I wish I was less approachable, but actually I do as someone who works with the public. Um,
Yeah, I get it. I mean,
yeah.
grass is always greener, right? Because I said this earlier today that people often think that I'm aloof or rude, but it's just what my personality is like. It
Yeah.
just I'm not intentionally trying to be standoffish. That's just the way my
Hmm.
personality. And I'm happy to talk to people. I mean, I think it's
Hmm.
probably self-evident, but I do the podcast thing. I can talk to pretty much anybody, and I can figure out where pretty much anybody is coming from. But I don't necessarily radiate that hey, come talk to me energy.
Yeah. Oh my God. This is entirely off topic, but for some reason this has just completely reminded me of, I guess, just how like we come off to other people.
Mhm.
Um, Baylor says, Steven, you surprised me the first time I attended a live. Your profile picture is so much more gloomy than the way you come off here in lives. Yes. And people actually told me that all the time when I was a Satanist, where so I was a leader in the Satanic Temple for years, and it was very much part of my religious identity. And some people started to call me the Mr. Rogers of Satanism because um, because a lot of Satanists do come off as like very cold and very stern and
Hmm.
very dour, and they're actually very cool people. That's just the way they are, and I do
Hmm.
not. I do not come off that way. But this the yes, the self-governess says, "Whoa, you aren't giving satanic." Yeah, I know. Um, this is what
Hmm.
everyone has told me is that I do not give off satanic. But all that to say, okay, Jesus, I was telling a story. Oh, yes. Okay, so I recently shaved. And so I used to have a full beard. And I go back and forth between like having a full beard and then I shave it off and I lose like 15 years. And this man at work comes through my line. I manage a store. And I was running the cashier, or I was running the cash registers. This man who has known me literally since I was 4 years old. He comes through my line. He has a pleasant chit chat with me. And then he turns to the other cashier and he's like, "Is Steven here?" And she points at me and he's like, "I did not recognize you without your beard. You look like you're in high school."
Uh, that happened
That's funny.
I remember that happened when I was a kid with my dad. Like I had only ever seen him with a beard and he shaved, and I just remember crying, because I think he just kept his mustache or something. You look like Satan now.
Okay, so
Uh,
the self-governess says, my gay friends were the first to intervene on my drinking in my 20s. This sort of trend continued when it came to relationships and partying. Maybe their particular approach to me was unique. A different sort of interest in my well being than other women might be slightly competitive, hence encouraging even my dumbest ideas or straight males. I mean, okay. Yes, no, totally. There's the bond between fags and hags is ancient, formidable,
Hmm.
very storied. Um, and it is far more um hold on, more comments. Caleb says, I've been told I'm off-putting as a northerner living in the South. um and I actually know Caleb. Caleb is a great friend of mine. I think Caleb is delightful. um but I can see how some people would say that. Yeah.
Some people down in the South really have, they still have some very old fashioned opinions about us Northerners. And
Hmm.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
interesting.
Well, so going back to what the self-governance was saying about gay men, my experience with gay men is that a lot of them are very good at friendship. And maybe it's just because I've been it obviously there's some self-selection there. Obviously that's completely biased by anecdote and whatever, but um my experience is that gay men often do friendship when they are healthy. Have the gay men in my life have done friendship very well and care very deeply and show care very well, and especially between gay men and women. I have had some extraordinary friendships with women um, that I would consider just some truly like my deepest friendships. So yeah, I think what the
Hmm.
self-governance is referencing, while I can't say it is a broader theme in the world, it has definitely been a theme in my own life. Yeah, she says yes, that is how I have experienced it. Yeah, totally.
And speaking of which, shout out to the underrated straight male slash lesbian friendship, because that's it can be a little more
Yes,
complicated for obvious reasons. But I've had some, the inverse being like the bro dyke dynamic is also another very
the
cool.
bro dyke yes, there's the fag hag dynamic and then the bro dyke dynamic. Absolutely.
Hmm.
Yeah, and I don't know, just as someone who loves human relationships, I just think it's all so beautiful. I think that all of these different configurations of friendship are so lovely and so unique. I think also intergenerational friendships are really lovely.
Hmm.
Like I've started to become very close with a woman in her 70s, and she's just lovely person. We talk quite a bit, and there's something very sweet about connecting with someone who was born in the 1930s or whenever, 1940s. There's um so it, just thinking about like what do I want to accomplish with writing about friendship, writing about these relationships is like I want to see more of it. I want to see more friendships, more intergenerational friendships, more friendships between men, between women, between men and women, and all combinations thereof. And I think that it is we I think that makes everyone stronger,
Yeah,
assuming that they're healthy friendships.
Hmm.
Um,
indeed.
yeah.
Question for you, Steve. Do you think when you talk about wanting, these different, diversity of different friendship types and your interest in human relationships, do you think that comes from personality type or your background? Because at least for me, because we have that shared background of being the children of pastors and growing up in the church, I feel like from a very young age, I had to have a high emotional intelligence because
Yes.
you're put in these situations where you become aware of things that maybe other people, like somebody who's in an abusive relationship or somebody who's going through a really hard time, that maybe like you would become if it was in your personal life. But at least for me, like I had to have like from a pretty young age higher emotional intelligence, but also being kind of dispassionate about it because it is seen as like weirdly like a position of authority. And my wife is a pastor's kids as well, and she would talk about it was one of the things we really bonded about, like adults being really intense with you from a really young age, like way before you like have the
Yes.
emotional tools to
Yes.
handle it.
100%. Yes.
Mhm.
Um, my battery charger just died. Okay. Um,
All right.
is it personality or is it upbringing? I mean, it's both, obviously,
Mhm.
but the I grew up watching my dad have very, very close friendships with people, and my dad is, for all his faults, he's extremely socially connected and extremely vulnerable with his friends. So I just grew up watching that. And I talk about this in the article how I remember growing up, he said about his best friend from college that they used to tell each other, if you were a woman, I would marry you.
Mhm.
And he wasn't like confessing to being gay. What he was saying, what that was an acknowledgement of just like a deep compatibility and a
Mhm.
deep love, like a deep compatibility and deep love that it
Agape
is so,
love.
yeah, that
Yeah.
was so deep that
Mhm.
if his best friend was a woman, they would get married.
Mhm.
Um, but also I saw that as kind of a crying out for language for that kind of friendship, and
That's what I was
they
going to
often,
say.
yeah, it's like a crying out for a kind of incarnational seal, a vow, some
Yeah.
word spoken to contextualize that deep love between friends as its own unique thing, right? Which is very important. But all that to say, I mean, I grew up surrounded by my dad's friends. I was mentored by my father's friends. Growing up, I had the opportunity to be mentored by a lot of really solid guys who were all friends of my dad. And so I think I was just socialized from like a very young age to have a strong appreciation for friendship. And then like what you said, the social and emotional intelligence that comes from being a preacher's kid. I was a preacher's kid squared. So I was a missions
Mhm.
kid, and then both of my parents are pastors, and so I got all of it, and that does kind of force you into a weird limelight. Um, Maybe it's also my personality. Maybe it's also
Mhm.
just kind of some natural qualities. I mean, all of this converges. Personality,
Mhm.
inborn stuff converges with the your environment, your upbringing. So yeah, I think it's
Yeah.
both
Well, I think
for sure.
yeah, it's both and right. And I've also noticed
Hmm.
this, and I'll just touch on this, and I don't want to make it too much about this because I don't exclude exclude Lirpa. But I feel like
Keep
my
talking. I'm
writing.
listening. I just need to grab my battery pack. I'll be right back.
Sure. Yeah, I feel like my writing a lot of the time takes on the cadence of a sermon, really, and it
Hmm.
has like emotional beats in the same way that like a sermon would exist in like you take some larger seemingly unconnected example, and then you kind of talk about that, then digging into it, and then I'll cite a book or whatever. It's not the Bible, but the same idea, and it loops back around to that same original cadence that like a sermon would have. And I feel like that's something that like just gets socialized into you from a very young age. So I don't know. I think it's maybe the calling is there because I have a couple different generations of pastor in my family. Like my great grandpa apparently was like a way cooler than I would ever be because apparently he was like back in during Prohibition, he was like a rum runner and my grandma like made him give up being like a Prohibition era rum runner, and he was like a Freemason and gave that up, and then became like a big tent revival preacher. And like, damn, my great grandpa was way cooler than I'll ever be.
That's
Because
amazing.
that's a cool life story.
Yeah.
Lirpa, what are your thoughts, if you
Um,
have any?
well, my dad wasn't a preacher. He was a cop. But I didn't grow up with him very close, but he
Hmm.
told me lots of stories about, apparently that's how I was born. I don't know. I'm guessing I'm going to tell you this one story, but I guess when my mom was, she was just about to give birth. And so my dad, like, it was in rural Missouri where I was born. And so he put the cherries on his personal vehicle and like sped down the highway. And when I learned that story, I felt pretty cool. So that's not at all
Hmm.
about friendship or anything, but it's just about, dads having jobs, I guess.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Dads having jobs is good. We like dads having jobs.
Hmm. We
Um,
Yeah.
did.
my dad was, I mean, I talked about this on your podcast, PJ. My dad runs an international ministry, and he is still an exorcist. So I was raised in like a super religious setting, and I saw some crazy shit growing up.
I
I
can
didn't ever
imagine.
see I didn't ever see the laws of physics being broken, but I saw people entering into altered states of consciousness and convulsing and speaking in other voices and
Wow.
holy shit, crazy, scary stuff. Um,
That's
Yeah, I can
crazy.
imagine.
yeah, yeah. So it's given me like a lifelong fascination with altered states of consciousness. And and then self-governess says, and then became satanic. Wow, this is wild. Correct. Yes. In
Hmm.
fact, I converted straight from Christianity to Satanism, to religious non-theistic Satanism when I was 30 or 29. I was 29 or 30, and I
Hmm.
went straight from one to the, and this is actually the first time in my life because yeah, this is the first time in my life that I am religiously unaffiliated. Over a year now. So I'm now
Hmm.
officially a nun, an None, because I have been very deliberately, self-consciously uh, religious for my entire life. And then when I left Satanism and when I left the Satanic Temple, and I call myself actually a post-Satanist. I don't call myself an ex-Satanist. It's like post-Satanist is like it's still in there. It's still part of me.
Hmm.
I still draw from it. I'm still informed by it, but it's like I have expanded. I've moved on to another part of my life, but I don't reject that season of my life. Same with Christianity, actually. That's how I feel about Christianity. I'm still very informed by Christianity. So yeah,
Hmm. Well, as we said the other day, like a pastor's kid, like you zig or zag really hard in one direction or the other. Like
yeah,
that's your whole life forever, or you're a Satanist, or in my case, like, hardcore materialist atheist until, fairly recently when I'm more open to spirituality and metaphysics and the non-material. So I
hmm,
think I call like iconoclastic thinking, or the opposite, where it's no sacred cows, and they went very like no sacred cows. Anything you need to destroy it all. It's all bullshit, etc. But it's it's interesting
yeah,
to see the different personality types and how that manifests.
totally, yeah, yeah. No, it's interesting. I mean, I still love Satanism. I really do. I love temple Satanism. I love the Satanic Temple, but I also love LaVey, and I love and as dorky as it is, and the dorkiness is part of its charm. And I mean, one of the things that I love about Satanists is that they are the most unironic people in the world. They take it so seriously, and I love unironic people.
Yeah.
I
Same.
love people who are just unapologetically into it, whether it's Legos or furries or or wrestling or whatever it is. Like
Mhm.
I love people who are just unapologetically cringy. I love it. I
Mhm.
find it refreshing.
God, that reminds me of when just after my husband and I moved out here to Virginia, we had connected with some uh, Satanic Temple folks out here. And we were going to do a big protest on the inauguration because it was January of 2017. So
Yeah.
We went to this one guy's house in Maryland, and they were a brand new chapter. Actually, I don't think they ever made it to like chapterhood or whatever. They were still like friends of TST or something, to that effect. But it was, I went and met up with them first, and we were all kind of practicing, like, what are we going to do at this inauguration? And then my husband came, he was at work and doing stuff, and he was in the military, and we were like, God, it was hilarious. We were all wearing cloaks because the guy whose townhouse we were at, he had ordered all these things. And so we were all wearing these hooded cloaks and marching around his townhouse on the inside. And so my husband comes in and he's like, this is fucking ridiculous. Let me teach you how to march. So we're all up until like 7 a.m, just like practicing marching in this guy's townhouse.
Okay,
Wearing
here's the
cloaks.
thing. Here's the thing. This is why whenever people say, are Satanists scary? The answer is no.
It seems they're mostly theater kids, basically.
They are all theater kids. It is autism with candles. That is what it is. It is autism with candles, oppositional defiant disorder with candles. That is all it is. And granted, there are some scary, there's the Order of Nine Angles, which is fucking terrifying. There is some scary shit there. But mainline Satanism, no. It's actually, the way I think of it is Satanism is a neurotribe. And it's like, it's really about connecting with people who have the same mind as you, who have the same type of mind as you. And so the key that unlocks the door is being able to see Satan as a hero instead of a villain. It's the ability to, despite all of the cultural baggage, despite all of the indoctrination and fear and cult and history, centuries of seeing Satan as the personification of all evil, despite all that, being able to look at Satan and be like, I like that guy. That's a very weird kind of mind to just be able to look at all of that and be like, I like him actually. That takes and to be able to do that seamlessly, to be able to do that without effort. And that was the way it was for me, where it's like I could just look at the image of Satan and I got it. And I saw Satan from Paradise Lost as a hero. And that took zero effort of me. But what that actually did was it unlocked a door for me to enter a room full of a bunch of people who are just as weird because they also went through that self-filtration process, that self-filtering process. And so I think so much of religious community is that it's a self-selection process to where you are selecting yourself into communities of people who have kind of a similar brain in some ways than you. Now, the downside of Satanism is that you will not be surprised to learn that they are not the most agreeable and cooperative people, and I eventually could not handle it. I eventually could not handle the infighting, the drama, the chaos. I was like, I'm fucking done.
Both I was involved with had similar
theater
problems.
Kids, yes. Hold on, a cat is banging on the door. You are about to meet another cat.
So many cats.
Come in.
Yeah, it's interesting, and that's kind of. I feel like I could never get into Satanism because of it, because I ended up looking into it in my more edgy days and very into heavy metal, and like to me, it's like okay, the two things that makes me think of is like wait, I'm just trading one set of dogma for another. And again, maybe that's a personality type. And like I understand why, and we talked about this in our first conversation, like the bound versus unbound or joiner versus not joiner. And I'm very much not a joiner. And that's something in recent years I've been struggling to overcome. Just to loop it back to when I was talking about my article on the Venture Bros, it's like the main character was a child venturer in the world of like, superheroes and super scientists and stuff. And when you see all that stuff at a young age and you're expected, like, if you, like I was talking about, when there are adults who are being very intense with you and you also like, they treat you as an equal in a way, um, it can be very hard to take it seriously because much in the same way, like, okay, if you're a 7-year-old and you're dealing with like the bureaucracy of the rules of kidnapping when a supervillain is kidnapping you. It was very hard for me to take this shit seriously again. It's like, oh, do we have to do it that exact same way? The robes have to be this exact length, and not literally because I don't know what the rules are, but that's kind of the impression that I got. Like I have a really hard time so unironically and sincerely buying into things sometimes because of that. Like I'm individualistic and what's the word? Like oppositional to a fault. So maybe that's what I need to do. Go to a Church of Satan thing. Just all right, fine. The robes are the length that they are. It's fine. I'll do the ritual, whatever. It's personal growth.
Well, what I eventually found was that I eventually started to find the satanic story very limiting, and it no longer satisfied my spiritual needs. And so it's like I needed more stories to kind of like I needed a wider mythopoetic landscape. I needed more narratives, more stories to draw from. And it was about this time that I kind of started to take note of my husband's Judaism, and he's very devout, and it's just like the just the depth of Judaism and Kabbalah and the rituals and the communities, and just it's like it's beautiful. And looking at that and realizing I don't have that. There is there's a and that there was a real depth that I was missing, of just thousands of years of wisdom. That kind of those thousand, but not just wisdom, also some batshit crazy stuff. And part of the the wisdom of a tradition is how it deals with the batshit crazy stuff. And um, but I eventually just came to accept like I need more. I need more mystical experiences. I need more altered states of consciousness. I need more stories. I need more rituals. And so it isn't that I don't necessarily feel like it is true to say I left Satanism. I no longer identify as a Satanist, but I think it's more accurate to say something more like the boundaries just dissolved and it just expanded, right? Um, like the stuff that led me to Satanism is still there. I the stuff that led me and my personality type, all that stuff is still is still there. But there's also so much more, and it's changed, and it's yeah. So
Mhm.
religious
Yeah, I
journeys
think.
are complicated.
Yeah, I think a lot of the and we talked about this before. The some of the ritualization of religion is intentionally self-limiting, and intentionally puts you in, and that's again another thing we talked about is the intentionality of community that it puts you in. Because like like for example, self-governance says, "Oh wow, the self-selection really works for me. I like being thrown in random cohorts. I enjoy that more. I'm bad at joining too." Well put. Yeah, that's kind of how I am because
Hmm.
my 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 personality type is like if it's taken to its logical conclusion and that like isolationism, I'll end up as like the Unabomber part 2, right? So I have to purposefully put myself with other people and like, okay, this isn't really for me, but I see why it's for you, and let me purposefully do that because I've joked before that like my temptation is not leaving my wife for another woman. My temptation is a cabin in the woods, and not like in the terroristic sense, more like complete isolation. That and as you probably know, like in the tarot, like the one that draws to me most is the hermit, that search
Yeah.
for knowledge in isolation, and that's the positive side. The bad side is the negative isolation and the loneliness, and like the that you get way too in your own head and you start thinking crazy things, and then, like you said, you talk to somebody like, oh wait, now the world isn't ending. It's all not all shit. All of that. So I think that's the value of these things, be it Christianity, Satanism, Judaism. They all have that purposefully limiting thing where you're purposely putting yourself around other people,
Exactly.
so you don't get too lost in your own head.
Yeah.
Well, it's what Emile Durkheim wrote about at the turn of the century. I think it was at the turn of the century, where, famous sociologist, he wrote about Stephen McAllister is here. We love you, Stephen. Well, I love you, Stephen. The other two don't know who you are, but I know who you are.
I'm
Um,
sure I could get to love him if I knew him.
Yeah.
so Emile Durkheim wrote a pamphlet or a monograph called Suicide, and it was a study of suicides in different communities. And obviously it's outdated, but what he found is that the least suicides happened in the most highly religious settings because they did not experience ennui. They did not experience the detachment. People who were strongly bound to a religious community were the least likely to kill themselves. Um, Whereas people who are untethered from traditions are far more likely to commit suicide. And I think that generally holds true. I'm not a sociologist, don't quote me, but there's something about that rings very true of just like the power of religion, even if it is extremely restrictive. And I mean, he was talking about, very severe religious settings, severe by our standards. Um, Orthodox Judaism and so on and so forth. And they had the lowest suicide rates.
That
Because
reminds
Hmm.
me.
yeah,
Oh, I'm sorry.
no, go for it.
Well, there's been some studies about addiction that have been similar. Like if you give like these rats who are addicted to cocaine, if you give them like friends or things to do, they lose interest in drugs.
Yeah,
And I feel like
absolutely.
it's kind of a similar thing. If you have a community,
Rat
you're
Park.
less likely to. Yeah, yeah, rat
Yeah.
perk.
Yeah, it was the Rat
Well,
Park
obviously,
experiments.
yeah, and we talked about this before too. Like obviously there are downsides. It could be very restrictive, but like feudalism was the most stable social structure that has ever existed, and had like the longest longevity, and it had very defined social roles, religious roles, like having the noblesse oblige. Like your lord had a duty to his people, the people had a duty to the lord. And I'm not saying that as a value judgment of like we should return to feudalism because it wouldn't be good, but it was incredibly socially stable. You weren't searching for purpose. You knew exactly what your purpose in life was. So I would imagine
Yes.
suicide in these more traditional societies is non-existent.
Hmm. Yeah. And interestingly, even back then, if I remember correctly, Emile Durkheim observed that men committed suicide more than women.
Hmm.
Um,
Much like today.
even even over a century ago. I mean, today, now 75% of all suicides are men. Um,
Hmm.
People don't know this, by the way. I'm going to go on a rant. I've been doing lots of research on this for an article. Suicide is the number one killer of men under the age of 50 in the UK. The
Wow.
number one, like higher than heart failure, cancer, homicide, car wrecks, all of it. Suicide is the number one killer of men under 50 in the UK. When they hit 50, then lifestyle diseases overtake it. Only then do lifestyle. And then I think in the United States, it's like number two for men under the age of
Hmm.
45. And then it's similar numbers just around the world in developed countries. And I know 5 men who have killed themselves. 2 men have called me when they were about to kill themselves. And it's just staggering to me that, like, I know 5 guys who have taken their own lives, some from high school, so, so on and so forth. And it's just kind of horrifying and astonishing to me that this isn't more known. That
Hmm.
that the biggest killer of men is suicide, and people don't seem to know. Kind of feels
Or
like people
care.
don't care. If we
And a
did
lot.
Yeah.
care, then
Yeah.
they would be pro. I mean, if there was a killer this deadly, going after any other group of people, there would be government programs, there would be all kinds of shit, right?
Mhm.
Um,
Hmm.
there's a very, to my ear, disturbing silence
Yeah.
around male suicide. There are several reasons why men tend to choose more lethal means. Men tend to be more compulsive, especially when alcohol is involved, or more impulsive, I should say, when alcohol is involved. So they choose more lethal means. They go for firearms, whereas women on average go for pills, that kind of thing. Um, Men are more impulsive, but then the big one, in my mind, is men have smaller support systems.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And so men will just have horrible things happen to them or talk about horrible or experience horrible emotions and not talk about it because they have smaller networks. Um, and so whenever whenever someone is close, whenever a man, and I've talked to several men who have been close to taking their own lives, the impression that I always have is like, oh wow, the intervention should have happened 1,000 steps before.
Yeah.
Like the
Hmm.
intervention for this guy should have happened when his father died, when his wife divorced him, when he lost his kids, when he faced financial ruin, when just like thing after thing
Yeah.
after thing. It's like the intervention for this dude should have happened like 5 years ago. And but and then by the time it gets to the point where he has a gun to his head,
It's
then
too
it's just
late.
crisis management. And yeah, no, I've been thinking about it and writing about it a lot because it's the biggest killer of men in
Yeah.
of all ages around
Well,
the
to add
world.
to
It
that, I remember reading that the life expectancy for men, I think they talked about the UK and the US, but the Western developed world more broadly, has dropped in the last decade, not because, basically just because of that, because of suicide. Like life
yeah,
expectancy has dropped because of suicide. And it's like, wait, how are we not talking about this? And I'm not a
it's
super
insane.
like, men's rights activist guy. But to me, like you
Yeah.
said, that seems insane. And when you say, oh, men don't have issues, you have privilege. I mean, that's the kind of the thing that I've noticed. The other two things that are related to that, like that is, I feel where the progressive side fails, where like anytime a man fails or something like that, it is personal moral failure, not
Yeah.
things that happen. And that's something that's internalized, and that, you could say
Hmm.
toxic masculinity, patriarchy, negative sides of feminism. It doesn't really matter to me. The name you call the devil, he's still going to do his tricks, right? And the other side of it being like women will attempt suicide at a much higher rate, but they're much less successful. And I think it tends to be the general
Yes,
received wisdom is women do it as a cry for help, and like you said, but for men, like it's steps way too removed. Like they've made that
yeah,
decision. It's done. You're not looking for a cry for help. You think there's no longer an option.
yeah,
Right.
for
And
sure.
and the whole thing about women attempting more often is that's like when I see this brought up a lot, especially online, there's inevitably a lot of responses that bring that up as like a counter rather than, out of concern or anything. But it's like, well, yeah, so what? The only reason for that is because women choose other means and, kind of trying to bring it back to, it's actually women who are suffering, not men, just completely
That's right.
erasing what the men are
That's
going
right.
through.
Mhm.
And
Hmm.
it
It's both
isn't
and.
zero sum.
Yeah,
It doesn't have to be zero sum. We
it
can we
doesn't.
can acknowledge. It's like we're in this together. Like men and women, we're crawling around on this godforsaken fucking rock together. We It isn't zero sum, and there's this real sense that I think a lot of people have that okay, like for example, I have a friend, I brought up to a friend some of Richard Reeves' research about um men struggling in academia. And the struggles for boys start in preschool. They do not start in college. They start in preschool. The gap between male and female enrollment in college and graduation from college is bigger than the gap was before Title IX went into effect in the 70s, but in the opposite direction. It's huge. So there are now, so the gap, okay, actually, thank you, Stephen McAllister. Um, uh, in 2022, 49,476 Americans died of suicide, 1.6 million estimated suicide attempts. And then further up, he said men are required to be invincible still. Yes. So, okay,
Mhm.
so I brought this up with a friend of mine, and that women are, yeah, 3.85 times more than women is, yeah, that's right. So I brought this up with a friend of mine, like, hey, there's these big discrepancies in academic outcomes between men and women. The gap between men and women academically is bigger than it was in the 70s before Title IX. That's insane. We should be really worried about that, because not only does that hurt men, it also hurts women. It hurts society. It hurts kids. If there's this big
Mhm.
academic gap between men and women, like, we should fucking care about that.
Yeah.
And my friend's response was, why? Why should we care? But that's fine. Men have been in power for so long, and now let women enjoy some of the power. And
Was this a man or a woman? Out of curiosity.
a man, this was a man who said
Mhm.
this. Um, but that's like the default. That and
Yeah.
and so there's this sense of it is zero sum, and I think that that's just so unfortunate. And so it's really worth like, my goal is to pay attention to men's health issues, and be kind of in the manosphere, as a writer and thinker, but hopefully in a way that communicates emotional intelligence and compassion and non-zero sum thinking, and um, care for humanity, while focusing on the concerns that men and boys face.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't need to be zero sum at all. I mean, there was something I read earlier this week about the loneliness epidemic. It was the same kind of dismissal about like, why should we care if men are lonely? What are we supposed to do about it? Kind of one of the more toxic sides of the feminist perspective on the whole deal. But yeah, it doesn't need to be zero sum. We can care about everyone's loneliness. We can care about everyone's
Exactly.
mental health.
Exactly.
It's
Mhm.
we experience these things in different ways. Generally speaking, men and women, and that's fine. I think especially when it comes to like the suicide conversation, uh, and the loneliness, like we experience loneliness in different ways. And there
Yes.
are different issues that men and women have to overcome, to get over that, or you know different solutions for us all.
Yeah. And
So
they
it
look,
is
yeah,
worthwhile to talk about each individually.
because
But
they're
yeah,
differences on average. They're cultural
right.
differences, also biological differences, and they are real on average. And yeah, Stephen McAllister says Scott Galloway talks a lot about the masculinity crisis. I was just listening to Scott Galloway on a hike yesterday. He's like ornery dad. I really like Scott Galloway. Um,
Mhm.
but no, I mean, I want to write an article about this. Yeah, so this is a teaser for a future article, because I'm going to be writing more about suicide and men's mental health, because I think it's so important and not enough people are talking about it, in my opinion. Um, but so a dude will, we all know a dude, and the dude will say the dude will hit a rocky patch, and then he will, but then he'll say two words. He'll say it's fine, or he'll say I'm fine. And I think that it is incumbent upon all of us to not believe him.
Mhm.
Like, it is, and that doesn't mean we be invasive. That doesn't mean we make him talk about his feelings. That doesn't mean that we make him uncomfortable. None. It doesn't even mean that we have a conversation with him. It just means when that dude goes through a divorce or gets broken up with or drops out of school or whatever the case may be, he's or someone he loves dies or he loses a friend or whatever, he will say two words: it's fine. And it is incumbent upon all of us to not believe him and to at least somehow signal that if he needs to talk about it, that he can talk about it.
Yeah.
Because I know for a fact, of the 5 men who killed themselves that I know, a lot of them said consistently, I'm fine. It's fine. That is the refrain of the American man. I'm fine until
Mhm.
they fucking kill themselves. Yeah. Anyway, on that cheery note, are there any other thoughts before we wrap up? We have spent 4 hours together today.
We
We
have.
have
I feel
so
like
much.
we're what's the podcast equivalent of trauma bonding? Whatever that thing is, we're doing it.
Hmm.
Podcast bonding.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Hmm.
we are.
Yeah.
Pod drama bonding. Yeah. No, I mean, I think there's it's one of those things that you would like to have some nice bow to put on it, but it's something that we're in the middle of
Yeah.
dissecting and talking
There's
about, and
no
it's
nice
difficult
bow.
to talk about because
Yeah.
I very specifically try to avoid. I don't even avoid because it's so difficult to talk about, especially in the online spaces where you'll get the flame wars going. I just don't want to deal with that, and I'm just going to say what I have to say and try to find a way to write about it in the future and see where it goes because that's all you can do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. Same. Yeah. And so, so hopefully, um, so during this live stream, we have solved the male suicide crisis. We have brought back um, vows of friendship and many other things. I was going to name this stream breastfeeding chihuahuas, but I decided against it.
Yeah,
People,
probably for the best considering what the
I,
content ends up being.
I was typing it on my phone, and then I was like, no, I shouldn't. I backspaced.
Breastfeeding
People will
chihuahuas will
not
make
know the
sense
reference.
tomorrow. Yeah.
Yeah.
People won't know what that's about until the podcast comes out tomorrow. Okay. Um, thank you everyone for joining. This was great. By the way, the schedule for apologies first for missing the past couple of weeks. I was not well, and
And
Lirpa
I was out of town and driving and stuff,
was gallivanting. Um,
As she does.
and
as she
I
does.
on an upcoming weekend, I will be, speaking of men's issues, I will be at a secret men's initiation thing for a weekend. I'm not allowed to know what it is. It might be hazing. I might be coming back with ritual scarification. I don't know. I'm not allowed to know what's going to happen to me. Um,
It's exciting.
so um, I will be gone. So 1 weekend this month, we won't be doing a live stream, and also the time will be changing because I will start working on Sundays. So we'll probably have to push this back a bit on Sunday evening. So, any other announcements?
Oh,
I think that's
if
it.
people don't know, we do have Prester John is we what we're referring to is we recorded the digression sessions episode today, so that is coming out tomorrow. So
Yes.
keep an eye out
So
for
look
that,
out for
and
that.
then you will understand the breastfeeding chihuahuas joke and get to hear our dating advice.
Our terrible dating
It's
advice.
terrible,
Yes.
Yes,
folks.
it's terrible,
Um,
but we did
all
solve
right.
the crisis of dating. So
Awesome. Thank
You're
you,
welcome.
Claire, Stephen, Self-Governess, Caleb, everyone else who commented. We love you all. We will see you around Substack. Peace out.
yes,
See you, everybody.
bye.
Bye.